going to devote our energies to sports and gardening, all the cultural pursuits as far as they're concerned. In fact, we're going to put the goons to sleep. Meanwhile, we dig.
Here we go again.
Greetings and welcome to the Anadrome. This is Byrne Power coming to you from Tbilisi, Georgia. In the Caucasus Mountains, not the Appalachians, not somewhere on the east coast of America, but somewhere right on the border between Asia and Europe. Well, it has been a pretty nice day here today, I must say so myself. And not too hot, not too cold. Perfect. Had time to spend with a friend, walking through the nearby park, talking about life. Speaking of friends and talking about life, I have another dialogue coming up here with Andy Edwards, who's made a couple of appearances on the Anadrome. This was from a little bit earlier this year, and what we talked about was the meaning of music. What is this thing called music? Now, obviously, in 1 hour conversation or whatever, you're not going to get to the bottom of that question. But you can start to realize that music has meaning. It's not simply a commercial property. It's not simply a collection of sounds. It does something when it hits us. So we're going to discuss that in a moment. Before we do, I'd like to remind you, you need to like this video, help the algorithms find it. You need to make a comment if you find that we've said something that's worth your responding to. You should also subscribe to the channel. And even better, if you've already subscribed, or even if you haven't, I could use your help. And one of the ways you can express that help is by making a contribution to the channel. I do need technical things. My computers are ancient. My microphone on my computer is ancient. I need to upgrade. But at the moment, what I mostly need is a microphone to do better recordings. So, think about donating something to the cause. If you do, and if you give money through this channel, write the words Anadrome on it. And if you really want to go all the way, you can buy a copy of my puppet book. What do I mean? Do you know about my puppet book? Let me explain it here. You may have seen this before, so this would be a good chance for you to go out and get a tea ready for the actual discussion with Andy Edwards, which will follow this which will follow this brief interruption in your life. It's here, rescued from Alaska. This year, my first ever book, 3 Motions. Motions is an old English word for puppet shows. Indeed, there are 3 puppet plays here written by myself for my Alaskan puppetry classes, including my versions of the medieval classic Everyman, cleverly entitled Every Puppet, and even better, my retelling of the Faust legend, updated for the 21st century, also very cleverly, with a special introductory essay on the meaning of puppetry. Now, are these 50-page booklets physically worth the $25 price? No. But this isn't about material possessions. This is about being part of this odd channel and whatever it is we're doing here, trying to understand things. And these little booklets are unique. Each one is numbered and signed by yours truly. When they sell out, they are gone. I will never reprint them. Special deals if you want multiple copies for a production of your own. Just let me know you're doing it. That's $25 for the USA, Canada, Mexico, most of Europe. There may be some corners, like, I don't know, Russia, etc., and might require some extra money, as would Asia, Latin America, and Africa, or Tonga, or Australia probably. I'll have to add another $5 or so, depending on where you're from. But part of the money goes to my assistants who are shipping these from me from their respective American and European locations. Use the links below, PayPal, GoFundMe, and make sure you add the word book, B-O-O-K, book, to let me know this is not just a normal contribution to the channel, which you can still make. This book will not last long. Help me keep the channel alive. I get no other funding except from you, the viewer. I don't get it from YouTube. I don't get sponsorships. It's up to you. If you appreciate what I do on this channel, get a book. It's a great way to remember what this channel was about, and it'll be something unique because they're all signed and numbered. Okay, so I have Andy Edwards with me, musician, drummer. Used to hang out with Robert Plant, played in his band of Joy, which was a post-Zeppelin affair. And has his fingers deeply in prog pies and knows jazz fusion certainly a lot better than I do, and all of that sort of stuff. I mean, I'm kind of with you up to a point, and then at a certain point, he's going, okay, Andy's progging again or something. But what I really like about talking and listening to you is when you just kind of go off and just start talking about ideas. And I always get the feeling that, you're kind of restricted because you've got a musical audience. And one thing I've noticed about them is they're extremely opinionated. And, it is politics for them. Everything is like, what? You like Led Zeppelin? What? You like Pink Floyd? What? You like modern prog? What? But I really like it when you do your philosophy Sundays and that sort of thing. And just kind of go off on observations about the state of the musical world, but also beyond that as well. So, welcome aboard.
Are you okay, Byrne? How are you today? It looks very sunny over there in Georgia.
Yeah. Well, Georgia tends to have a lot more sunshine than the British Isles do.
Yeah. Well, it's very sunny here. I've got the curtains closed, but it is a lovely day, and I've had a bit of a rough time at the moment. With stuff with my kids in school, but I walked out this morning, saw the big blue sky and the trees and the birds, and it did give me a bit of a lift. And I think that's aesthetically where we all start, isn't it? It was that response to being alive and nature, and it's always good to remember that.
That fits into what I wanted to talk about, which is
I did that for you, Byrne.
With music, but one of the things I have a lecture which I gave several years back, and I'm going to make a YouTube video eventually with it. I can't get monetized, so it doesn't matter how many clips I use, and so I'm going to use lots of them to demonstrate. But one of my thoughts is, people have said, "Well, what is music?" And I think one of the definitions coming out of the modernist idea is music is organized sound, to which my thought is, so then is a washing machine music? Well, of course, we say it can be. You can put it in your recording and people will appreciate it as an element of the sound. But it strikes me that definition doesn't really get to the heart of what music is. So I came up with a different kind of a definition. And that is, we know about, melody, harmony, rhythm, things like that. But what I started thinking about was a kind of a more holistic approach. What is music? What does it do to us? What is it? How do we use it? Where, for instance, one of the things I realized is, as I started listening to music around the world, I have a very big record collection. This isn't it back here. I've got a few things, but back in Alaska, I'm trying to bring here eventually, Lord willing, and the creek don't rise. Is that, for instance, if you go to Switzerland, you'll hear yodeling, not the kind of commercial yodeling you'll hear in a kind of an oompa band, but there'll be these people way back in the mountains going, oh, oh. And what's really weird is a lot of people say, well, that's a method of communication between mountains. Sometimes, but really what they're doing is they're interacting with their cows. and they make a similar noise to the cows. Also, they've attached bells to all of the cows so that they can hear the cows, different pitches on the bells. So one thing I noticed is that music is always in conjunction with your environment and your animals. So that if you have, and this is traditionally prior to the technological world entering in. And so, the music in one place, you're not going to invent a piano in the Sahara Desert. You don't have the wood for it. You've got nomadic people looking around for resources. So what they're going to do is they're going to have flutes. They're going to have stringed instruments that, like the guitar seems to have kind of come through the north of Africa as an oud and eventually showed up in Spain. And and then eventually migrated north from there. The Hawaiians, for instance, who are more of a hybrid culture because of the way they received, they had their own Polynesian music, which is always based on logs that they're tapping. They have a rich sense of harmony. But what's interesting is that their music, once the West had come in there, then they really liked the sound of the guitar and the ukulele. And one of the things about Hawaiians is they're pretty big people. And so they have big fingers like me, which makes it tough for them to hit all the notes. So they started getting into this kind of slack key guitar with slides and things. So music is part of it. Here's the thing. We often think of music as an experience that you get from, people walk into my house back in Alaska and they would say, I have a huge wall full of records and another one right next to it full of CDs. I mean, I think the count when I left was about 13,000 pieces of vinyl and CD. And people would say, oh, you have so much music. And I go like, I don't have any music there. Those are just recordings. Music is something that people make so that I had some guys who were in a band that I had invited up to the state fair. My friend Deke Dickerson and Barrence Whitfield doing a kind of rockabilly and 50s style R&B music. And they were practicing in my house. And I said, now I've got music. This is where the music is happening. This other thing is music in the same sense that someone watching a YouTube video is listening to words. That is, say it's a recording of the thing, but it isn't the thing itself. And you can kind of see where I'm going with this, is that if we, in a sense, it's almost like a vitamin we're missing. Most people aren't making music together anymore. They are listening to music. And in fact, what's happened over time, technology has changed so much, is I noticed as rock music was kind of wimping out and imploding at the end, also the rise of the little earbuds came in and the airbuds and all this other stuff, so that now people's experience of music is up here and you see people just kind of listening to stuff. And I've walked around a little bit in my life with headphones on, and I've said to myself, is that music, or am I just creating a soundtrack like I'm in my own movie? So another thing I noticed about music is that music used to be a part of everything. So music, it would be very hard to pull apart, for instance, music and work. Most cultures that had any group of people working would have work songs to go with it, but also you could have individual workers. So if someone's, doing little hammer movements on silver or something, they would have a little tune they would sing, and they would pass these things down. And pretty much every culture had some form of work and music. Music was also, I looked at music and speech. Speech, for instance, if you go back to Homer's Odyssey and the Iliad, that was not simply spoken the way we would speak. That was rhythmically incanted, so that you had, and that's the way you remembered it, just like the griots down in Senegal and Gambia and all these places. They knew their history based on the rhythm of the tune. And so music was also a part of, for instance, if you go to a black church in America, you hear the relationship between the speech and the music much more. Now, there are certain kinds of people who say that, yeah, it's a shame white people don't do that. Well, yeah, we did. And in fact, there are still churches where we do. So if you go to the Scottish islands, Hebrides and such, they have people who kind of chant their songs, and then they go into these songs that are kind of like oceanic almost, the old songs, the way they'd have a call and response. They'd line out the songs. And music was also there for education. We get that with our little, I don't know if you have the same ABCD song that we have in America, but most cultures will have to learn numbers here in Georgia. It's such a weird rhythm because they start off, erti, orti, sami, and then you get to 4 and the rhythm all breaks down. It's like otki. So it's like, oh. And then then the next one is chuti, and then exi, and then shvidi, and then rava, and then skra, and then ati. Ati sounds normal to me again. But then I realized, the best way for me to learn how to do this is actually as a swing rhythm. So it's like do 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 do. And it had this weird rhythm to it. And I taught myself the numbers through the rhythm. So music was a part of everything. And of course, the highest forms of music were always connected to the religious movements of a culture. So whether it's the gongs down in Indonesia, or the strings, or the shakuhachi flutes in Japan, the kind of syrupy sound you get from some of the East Asian music, or the very mono-tuned, the monophonous kind of sound you get in the Arab world, where there's no harmonies allowed. And then, of course, in Christianity, one of the things that attracted me to Georgia was the absolutely astounding polyphony they have, which they relate to the Trinity as well, so that you have the sense. So what a person believes is expressed in their music. And I think that goes to what Jimi Hendrix played. Something about, for instance, that Star Spangled Banner reflected on what he believed. The same with heavy metal, same that each of these things reflects something that is very close to the deeper core of what people believe. And so that's my kind of working definition of music, which then puts recording into a very strange place. But we'll get to that in a minute. What do you think of all this stuff?
I know exactly what you're saying. Your definition is a bit long, but I think what you're trying to say is what Wittgenstein ended up saying about language, is that the language is contextual and it relates between people. That's and the context comes between people, because when he got to his belief he originally had from philosophy that language was the structure of meaning for human beings, then he started to think, well, what about when someone's sarcastic, or what if somebody goes ouch? There is, and it's the context and the way somebody receives it, and this communal aspect of all art is something I think that has been drastically altered in the 20th century. So we tend to see culturally all the art forms through a lens that has come through us from the commercial aspects of the businesses around art in the 20th century. And what I mean by this is that for the recording industry to work, you have to divide the artist from the listener. And suddenly you have an audience. You sit in a cinema and watch a film. You're in the audience, and you look up to these characters that are marketed through almost being portrayed like the gods on Mount Olympus. And this is what I've called my Mount Olympus theory. And it's the Mount Olympus aspect of art which is crumbling at the moment, because what's happened with the internet is the technology has got so advanced that it's now returned art back into the hands of where it was all along, which was in the interactions between people. And that is where music happens. And so when we start to look at the function of music, which is what you described at that point, when you look at the function of music is to do with that John Cage idea that all sound is music, and it's just the framing with which you put around that sound that makes it music. That's the 4 minute and 33 seconds. So with that composition, he's making a really profound statement, but that statement isn't absolute. It's a certain way of viewing sound. What he does is he says in music, the framework is our attention, and the attention is the framework that is put around the music, 4 minutes and 33 sections, and then the 3 sections that he breaks it into, you know, which represents the Trinity, represents the dialectic. It's all that. It's an incredible piece of art, which the more I think about it, is so deep. And that piece, 4 minutes and 33 seconds, emerges culturally when it was needed. We don't need it anymore, because now the art, creativity, all that stuff is going through the roof, but it's been returned back to people. Now, what I've learned, you know, researching on my channel, I've had a couple of realizations what I didn't have before. And that's been on the end of a YouTube that quite a few people watch. You start to see yourself on the one side of it, and then you suddenly realize that as a commodity, it's not like what I was chasing all my life in the bands. There's no superstar aspect from it. There's no division between us and them. Mm-hmm. You know, if you look at my YouTube, the comments section and the chat that goes on and the stuff that's going on in the background on Twitter and the reaction videos, we're all in it together, you see, and nobody comes to my channel thinking I'm like the BBC, like I'm the authority on music. I know this. I just have an opinion. And so I think what's happening, to put it simply, because I'm going off all over the place with this, is for the whole history of mankind, music had a certain aspect that you described. And it was from a very simple thing. People do stuff in the world and it makes a sound. And because we're a community, that sound emerges into things. You see what I mean? Like kids. Yeah. We know it's funny that when you give a child pen and paper, they don't actually draw. What they do is bang the pencil into the paper and it makes a sound, which is then recorded as these marks, and they go, wow. And then 2 kids together will start banging together the other one. And so this is where everything comes from. All the instruments are based upon finding something in the wild that makes a sound, a natural sound, whether it's a twang or a bang or a flap or whatever it is. And then we organize that. And the reason we organize it is because we want to be able to do it together. Mm-hmm. And what's interesting with all of this is, as soon as recording is invented and there's money to be made, that division comes in. And then a cultural critique comes in. And actually, John Cain's composition is part of that cultural critique, I believe. Right. And it was needed at that time, but it's not actually accurate now. And I think going forward into this next cultural phase I think we're moving into, which is why things feel very chaotic, we have to actually go, no, only certain things are music. And I think a very important way of approaching music would be to say the opposite to Cage is that people do try and organize sound, and very rarely, every now and then, it approaches being music, or it gets 50% into being music. That music's a very specific thing, which is, I think, as I've always said it on my channel, is a useful balance between hedonism and perfectionism. The sublime is a balance that's been made between hedonism and perfectionism, and that is the Holy Trinity. That's the same thing. That's the dialectic. And when you go into all cultures seem to see the structure of everything is in a Trinity form. We perceive it in 2 forms usually, which is the dialectic. We have 2 forms, but when they're balanced, which is really hard to do, it forms this unknowable force. Now, what really convinced me of this is the conversation I really had with one of the world's leading quantum physicists. And so you get into the hard science, and this guy said, when you get down to it, we cannot understand that. There's these 2 things. There's the wave and the particle, and we can't bring them together. It's unknowable.
What I understand from that, and this relates to a whole set of ideas that we probably won't get into here, is that for a long time, science got very materialistic and said the heart of everything is matter, and that this is what there is. And if you go down, it's atoms, and then it's molecules, and it's DNA, and all of this kind of stuff. But now I think that takes a lot of pride to say that's the heart of everything, because you get down to the base root of everything and you don't really understand what's going on. But what I say now is the heart of everything is relationships, because what's happening down below in the subatomic, sub world are a series of relationships which are already formed. And so and these things are happening in time. And so people have often said, you've probably heard stuff like that. Oh, we're just all atoms. We should all just fall apart. I'm like, no, we're not all atoms. We're all relationships, and they're very specific kinds of relationships. So our DNA is a relationship. And in, I think, information theory, there's an axiom that says the thing, comes from bit, the information. So that what's at the bottom is already a relationship of information going on. We don't understand it really, but we're trying. But I think we have to go there. We have to go to the fact that the relationship is foundational, which is why I think music is so important. But it's also why we're having a problematic relationship with music, because we've made it a thing, a recording, and it isn't. It's something much broader. You know what the origin of the phrase "the jukebox" is, right?
It's a juke joint, isn't it? Which is
it used to be the juke joint, and then they brought in these machines that would play these 78 RPM players, and so they took the blues musicians who were playing in the corner in there, took them out, and then they started playing the latest records on the jukebox. So this is one of the results of recording. That it was less problematic than if that blues musician decided not to come that day, then there wasn't anything happening. If the little group assembled to do some sort of barbecue hoedown music doesn't show up, you don't have that. So you have your jukebox. Over time, people learned to manipulate that sound, the music in the corner. And so you ended up with something in the 1950s and 60s and 70s like Muzak. And Muzak was this, I actually found a Muzak record that I have. Someone was throwing it away, and it said, "This record is not to be sold." Basically, it was like a secret information, and it was telling you how the Muzak system worked, and basically how they had figured out this rhythmic structure to get people to buy more. So they would start off with a smaller song. Now, these were all songs that were not hits, although they might use the hit songs, but the whole point was to manipulate people's in the stores to make them feel like they should buy something. Well, that eventually disappeared. You don't hear Muzak that much anymore. What you hear now is just a constant din of background sound. Here in Tbilisi, I go into a mall and I just hear various kinds of EDM electronica in the background, just going and sometimes it's like, does this thing ever end? But we've become, but yet you take the music away, turn off that, and people start to get really nervous. They don't know what to do without that weird sort of background noise that, in a sense, the music, rather than John Cage's "everything can be music," we've turned any music can become.
That's my point. Yeah, it's like all this is not music.
Yeah,
and I've said controversially on my channel that all this electronic music and EDM is not actually music. It relates to music. It's like an impression of music. It sort of occupies a space that music once did, but it's not actually music, because you're correct. Is that if you they're sat in a car and your friend starts to sing, you're actually experiencing music, because that's what music is. It's that direct communication. It was all the way through the whole history of mankind for literally hundreds of thousands of years. Before we even had a history, that was what music was. And now it's been changed. And so now, once it becomes a commodity, you can do a fake version of it and you can put it in its place and you can swap it around. And this relationship I find very interesting in terms of AI, because AI music can exist because fundamentally that John Cage idea that everything's music. So we have to accept that something that sounds like music is music. And we do, because we are coming from this sort of capitalist, and I'm not anti-capitalist, as you know. I think capitalism is great and I love it. That's where I want to live. But you have to understand how it works. And music became a commodity, and it's not anymore. music had a worth. It's not anymore. But music never had a worth. Any working musician knows that. Any working musician knows that if you're playing in a bar, you're not getting paid to play. You're getting paid to travel there, to stop over, to set up, get your gear in, to buy the equipment, to have done the rehearsals. That's what you're getting paid for. But the playing of the music, no one's paying for that. And if you're in the room, you hear it for free. There's nothing, and if someone wants to put their head up and have that experience outside the venue,
you can stand outside one of the side doors and get it.
Yeah, this is the thing, because this is one of the fun. If you look at all the different art forms, the art forms all relate in some way to our senses, and they all have a relationship to storytelling. So there's a storytelling aspect. And so there's a formal and a content. Again, we come up against this dialectic. Always with art, you come up with this dialectic that we don't seem to be able to solve, right? Music is made out of sound. And I think sound, in terms of our perceptions, if you think of taste, touch, sight, it's the most mystical. Mm-hmm. Because the reason it's mystical is because it's not located in context like everything else. So I'm sitting here talking to you, but I can hear the cars going past in stereo. I know they're in front of me. I know which way they're going, and yet the curtains are shut and I can't see them. It's like ESP. It's like a superpower. My vision is limited to this. My actual focus is limited to right there. Right. I can only touch what's right next to me. I can only smell what's in the room, and I can only, that's a hit. But my hearing. And the thing is that when you look at quantum physics and you look at this particle wave thing, and you see us existing in a universe that's not particular, it's not of particles, it's actually of waves. And you see this wave, the closest waves to us are light, the visible light, and sound. And sound's the mystical one out of those. Does that make sense?
I have a theory why. And that is that vision and science has spent a lot on vision, on weighing and measuring, on the empirical. But the problem is that sound, our speech, for instance, when someone's watching us talking through this, they're not getting the same thing we're getting right now by talking. And we're getting a reduced version by the fact that we visualized it through a device.
Yeah.
So what someone's going to get hearing this later is a recording of that visualization. So there's layers of abstraction. And I think sound, however, relates to time and the things so for instance, my words, we can record them and put them on a spectrograph and see how they go up and down, but it says nothing about the meaning of them. That is to say, the meaning of the words can only be activated by the human ear. That is to say that they're not just obvious. It's the same with music. Music takes place in time. It doesn't take place in space, which is one of the real reasons why...
I disagree. I have to jump in. I disagree there. It does exist in space.
It does when the musicians are playing.
Exists in space.
It does as a series of relationships among the musicians, yes. But what I'm saying is that
you have to boil it down to the aspect that music has, and so we concentrate on rhythm and melody and harmony. One of the things that we never talk about is dynamics and volume, and that's entirely spatial. When you make a recording. So, for example, when they first started to record, like the Hot Fives or Jenny Roll Morton, there's one mic up there, and how did they mix it? How could they mix those sounds to get the right sounds at the right level? Spatially, when you hear music, it is always spatial. There's always a foreground and a background. There's always an up and a down. And so I think that when you get down to it, in reality, the universe probably is a unification between time and space. Einstein showed this to be the case. We can't perceive that. And so when we hear music, we see that as being time-based. When we look at a painting, we see that as being spatially based. But a painting is also time-based. But it's subtle because the artist can control through composition the way that your eye moves around the room. And then the cubists try to burst open time, artistically. And the same thing's happening with music. Is that when you listen to minimalist music, they're trying to make music almost spatial, so it breaks out of time. That relationship. I agree with what you're saying fundamentally. What I'm saying is that I think those two aspects are in all art forms, but they differ, and it makes the art form differ. And my point is that music.
I agree.
Yeah, music is.
But
magical.
What I think is we live in a culture that kind of hates time. It's also getting to hate space more too. But it hates time. It's hated time for a long time. So it's always trying to speed things up, minimize the effects of time, minimize the effects of aging. Everything we can do to avoid the effects of time. Time becomes like an enemy. Whereas I think one of the interesting things about music is those notes have a relationship to each other. The harmonic series and such. They have a relationship. The rhythms have a relationship to us. But the meaning of that can't be found by, with a microscope or even a microphone. The fact that I used to go to CBGBs, talk about time and music and space, they had speakers inside of CBGBs that would probably fill Yankee Stadium. And so you were like, it was down on you. It was so loud in this small place. Everybody who played there, everyone who came there had to stick something in their ears just to play. Because it was just like you're in the middle of this thing and you couldn't get out of it. And of course, there's a big difference, as you know, between the way bass hits you and the way high treble hits you. And I had friends who played in the band of Susans, and they were always playing multiple, Stratocasters and Fenders and stuff, and always playing high up on the fretboard, getting these high droney sounds. They would cause my ears to ring for days. Whereas the big bass stuff was more like inside of me. So yeah, there's a spatialization, and everything, I think, properly, there should be, we should be in relationship to time and space. But we live in a society that's trying to, like I would say, always cutting off the effects of time, but also more and more cutting off the effects of space as well, so that we're no longer in each other's physical space. We're in this other virtual space. So,
but what always used to sort of astonish when I used to teach music, and one of the things I had to teach was a unit called the function of music. And we had to list all the functions of music, which you did very well at the beginning. That would have been distinction without a doubt, but also things like football chants and the whole lot of all the different ways that, people singing prayers, all the different functional aspects of music. And the unit really wanted to show all these different things music did, that it didn't just do one thing. But I, being the sort of creative reductionist as I am, and I want to be able to get, because artists always want to get to the fundamental thing,
Right.
I would go, but what's it all trying to do fundamentally? And so I would always start by saying, I bang the table. It says, when I bang the table, it vibrates, and because it vibrates in a certain way, and it knocks against the air molecules. As that thing that just fluttered past you, because we're surrounded by air. Very weird how this happens. I'd love to talk about this as well. As I really have a belief that when you start making art, there's a part of it which is you're conscious and you're controlling, but then if you step back, it's like the world comes in tune with you and starts to go, So we're surrounded by air. We're not aware of it. You bang it, the air molecule vibrate, and they basically hit into each other like pool balls, banging into each other. They go across, and then they bang into your eardrum, which then creates a signal that goes to your brain. And it is at that point that the music exists. The rest of it is just collisions that make no sound. Sound does not exist. The sound's in your head entirely. Right. It's a way we are taking a mysterious thing that we exist in. It's definitely out there. I believe it's out there. We exist in this thing, but we don't know what it is at all. But we are organisms that are able to take vibrations that exist and turn them into things. We turn it into the music, and kids, when you tell them that, you could see the profound realization of that.
Right.
Because it's suddenly realizing, this is all happening in my head, and the music's happening in my head. What's even more bizarre, then in the 20th century, they realized that if they got something like an eardrum, I've got a bit of blood there. If they, oh, that's a coffee actually. If you got something like an eardrum, okay, right, and you got like a piece of wax. I mean, it's so basic, and you got a piece of wax and stuck it in there, then shout into the pretend eardrum, and so it wobbles that. It would scratch a line that would wobble the going back the other way, would wobble that diaphragm the other way, and all it does is wobbling the air in the same way as banging the table does, and then suddenly you hear the air come in the same way, and they would go, well, what is that? What a speaker's doing? I said, yeah, it's a piece of cardboard which is just wobbling. It's mimicking the wobble that you heard in your eardrum. That is all it is, and that's all that's going on. And there's two of them, and all this detail, because you think, well, how could that be? How can Beethoven come out of all this? It's because it's happening in here. Mm-hmm. It's a profound realization of how we relate to the world. And then you say, so this idea that we're relating to the world in sound, and then the sound's having what is creativity? Now, I have come up recently with a theory about what creativity is. It actually came from a Todd Rundgren album. I saw the title of a Todd Rundgren. Todd Rundgren made an album called Something Anything. Mm-hmm. And I thought, he's missing something there. He's missing nothing. So the universe, very simply, is in the way we perceive it. It could be nothing, anything, or something. And you start with a principle that this is this thing about perception. You've got sound coming in. Imagine you're the first human being and there's sound coming in. And you will go, well, there's nothing or there's anything. How do I make it into something? And once you create this madness that we're in and form it into a something, then we have something specific. Then we have truth, and we have morals, and we have
you
science,
could be talking about
history.
Zeros and ones. You could be talking about the zero and the one, but the zero and the one aren't everything. It's the relationship.
Exactly. So this is the thing I've been exploring, which is why I'm really happy to be talking to you about this. I got contacted by a quantum physicist, spoke to him about it, and because the thing is, he put a comment on my channel, and I was discussing this, and he said the big thing here is that the zeros and ones that computers use. Literally, I can take Beethoven, right, and I can record it into a digital recorder, and then I can print that out as zeros and ones. Then I can type those zeros and ones into a new text file, drop that into an audio file now, and when you hit play, it will come out sounding like Beethoven, 2 hours, like a crystal clear, accurate version of Beethoven. And you're right, when you listen to the recordings, now digital recordings are a series of zeros and ones. Before, it was basically some sort of pattern embodied into either magnetic tape or into a wax cylinder or a vinyl record, which is closer to being real, know. And there's this whole bunch of studies that CDs are not as enjoyable. They're higher quality, but not as enjoyable as vinyl because they're removed. And so I'm getting to your point slowly about recording, because I
used to play for people. I have a CD of Smells Like Teen Spirit by Nirvana, and I had a 12-inch single that was at 45 speed, I believe. And I would play the two difference, and they would go like, whoa, you could really hear the difference because there was something else. The whole digital recording system has a bit of difficulty with
those zeros and ones. And the thing is because human beings, the way we imagine so we think that we have a brain, and our brain is receiving the world, and our consciousness is our brain interpreting the world, rather than seeing it's the other way around. And then we look at whatever is the latest technology, and we apply that to our consciousness. So Freud comes out of the 19th century when the big technology was steam engines, and suddenly you've got all these pressures building up from below, and you have this psychodynamic idea of psychology. Now we believe consciousness is made out of zeros and ones, and that AI can come in and replicate everything, because everything can be reduced to zeros and ones. And I recently discussed this on a video, and I said, but human beings, we don't reduce to zeros and ones, because we reduce down to this relationship, which is echoed in quantum physics, but is also echoed when we try and think of the Big Bang and the limits of at the both ends of our perception. And this quantum physicist came on and said, yes, but we are currently working on quantum computers that will be based upon that thing. And I was like really shocked by this. And I said, so they might be able to create a consciousness like ours. Yes, they could, because they're not operating. It's a completely different. This is right at the edge of quantum theory, quantum computing. This is what they are exploring. So I talked to him about it, and the profound realization I had talking to him is that us human beings, we have our consciousness, and we are going to have to differentiate between a computer having a consciousness. They can have their consciousness, they can have their art and their music, but they're not human beings, because human beings, we have a relationship with each other. So, I'm going to go to my friend and put my arm around and say, "You're right, mate." Sure. And that aspect.
One thing to think of it as this: how is it? You've probably had this experience. You've been around a lot of musicians. You've entered some space, and you don't know what you're listening to, but you immediately know if it's a live musician or if it's a recording. And you can't explain to anyone exactly how you know. There's someone who lives up above me somewhere who practices the piano about an hour a day. I like that sound because it sounds real. Whereas if they were just playing some recording, and I was just like, stop it.
I was just about, this is so weird. I promise you, I was going to go down that direction. I was going to say to you that the most pleasant musical experience that I can have is lying in bed, nice sunny day, windows open, and I can hear someone practicing the piano at a distance. When we were talking about space, that's my most enjoyable thing. And when they do it, they can be terrible. It doesn't matter.
No.
Because I think it connects us back to how music was. Music was incredibly powerful, I think, to people because it was a rare thing and it emerged out of community. That you would work all week, and maybe you sang work songs and all that, but at the end, you would then went to, say, a bar or you went sat in your house, and then people would get up and they'd have this communal thing. And if you'd be sat in the background, and even if you're just clapping along, you were still part of it. And then this division happens, and it's so powerful in the 1950s. They can have music because people are still spellbound by the rhythms. Now it doesn't work anymore because we have actually gone, just shut all that down, shut it down. And that's the difference, is that when you hear recorded music, we have got used to going, shut that down. This is one of the big anomalies that I became aware of being in the commercial music industry. You make a track, it's absolutely brilliant. You go to your friend and you go, do you want to listen to it? And their gut feeling is, no, I don't. And so all the musicians are online saying, here's my band, we've really worked hard, listen to my track, and everybody's going, don't want to listen to it. But what do you want to listen to? Things that I know. I have developed a barrier against that. If you go downtown and there's a guy busking on the corner, you don't do it. You go, you listen to it and you go, well, that's nice. And you go and give him some money. So from every angle, you are 100% right about this, that there's a division there. And it's almost like an ethical division of that simple thing of poison and food. Is that the recording is like poison. It's the devil's bargain. And that's why the recording industry has always had the devil's bargain in it.
Yeah. Well, I am so fortunate. I live in this Soviet-era apartment building, but it was before they were building the really big, what are called Khrushchevkas, these 10, 15-story, soulless, gray apartment blocks. But I live in it's kind of like 7 floors, 6 floors, and it goes around, curves, and there's a backyard here that has a little place for people to go out and sit and smoke and stuff like that. And I've gotten to the point, I'm not in favor of smoking, but it's just like, gosh, I am so glad to see the teenagers and young 20-somethings smoking rather than all sitting there on their phones. I mean, in terms of real health, talking always is better than just mindless scrolling or something like that. But in my backyard, every now and then, about once every other month or so, these guys will get together, older guys will get together for a supra, which is a Georgian ritual meal. And that's when they sing their polyphonic songs. It doesn't matter if the songs are perfectly performed or anything. But I hear that it just fills up the entire courtyard back here. And you just go like, yeah, you guys can sing all night. This is the real thing. This is like vitamins. And I actually look at it like that. It's like something about music. It was there in almost every part of our lives. From some tribes would have birth music. Of course, we always have wedding music, and there's music at funerals. It brings us in, it takes us out. And now we're at a place where so much of that has been replaced by, like I've been to funerals. I had to pick a song to play on a box at a funeral for my stepfather. And I was just like, and everyone said I had to do that. And I was like, I don't want to do this, but I did, just because I wasn't in control of the funeral. When my mother died, I was in control. And so there were no recordings allowed. And I said, I want the church bell to ring a certain number of times and all of us to be quiet. And that was just like chilling. And a few people came up to me and said, that was the best funeral service I've ever been to, because there was nothing special about it. And, it wasn't fancy. It was just, the meaning was there. I mean, just listening to a bell toll slowly, several times is meaningful. And it
also
has resonances.
The thing that's interesting about bells is that a lot of cultures have these. Obviously, here in the UK, it's a really big thing. We've got all our churches, big and small, and they've all got bell ringing. Where my studio is, quite regularly, I'll go out to the car, and the bells are ringing in the local church, and it's everyone's hearing that. It's absolutely beautiful. Everybody loves it. But it's also incredibly English. If you went to Italy and then heard the bells ring in Italy, it's essentially Italian. And I don't know what that difference is. And I tell you, see, the thing is with human beings, there's so much in this that you have to explore. When it comes to the wavelength of light, and you look what our eye can differentiate in terms of wavelengths, it's pretty club hand in your eyes. It can't do that much. Sound, if you get a note and then you move that note just slightly sharp, like 100th sharp, human beings' ears can perceive it. Our perception of the detail that's in sound is much greater. It is much more high fidelity in that than our vision. Our vision, it helps us to get around, and we could walk off a cliff. So that's why we have an attachment to that. But like I say, this thing about sound, so we can pick up nuances in sound. Now, recently I did an interview with the great guitarist Stanley Jordan, who's famous for playing the guitar like a piano. The interview, which went on for nearly 3 hours, and I had my friend, it was almost like revelatory, the realization of why Stanley Jordan plays the guitar like a piano. And it's because he is applying certain ideas onto the guitar that were very, very profound. And you've gone into these ideas here. He said that when we try to understand something, we try and understand it visually. We measure it and we see it. He said, but you can also try and understand the universe in terms of sound. And then he pulled up a program that he'd created, which was based upon the solar system. And he said, imagine the solar system is the Dorian mode, and that the root of that mode is the Earth. So we sit on the fundamental. He said, now let's position all the planets to relate to each 7 notes in the mode. And then he said, let's pick a date. And he said, let's pick October the 7th, 2022. Didn't mention it. He picked the date that Hamas invaded Israel. That's another point. And he said, it's now 11 o'clock on October the 7th, And he said, now I'm going to position myself in Somalia, where my son was born at that time. And then the Earth appeared in this program, and it sent out a beam. And this beam went out to the universe, and then he started time. And as it went through, every time it hit a planet, this note would chime. And so you were sat there and you could close your eyes and now get a picture of the solar system in time and space. The volume of each note was related to how far it was away. And he said the following March, there was the point when the planets were the closest to to our Earth. He said you can't perceive that with a drawing, but you could perceive it by speeding this up, and you could hear certain notes, like these 4 notes, coming up into the melody of this mode. And the modes, because if you understand how modes work, there's a color that suddenly emerges out of this, and the modal concept goes right back to Pythagoras, who believed that by understanding the harmonic relationships of harmony which exist in the world, he could understand the structure of the universe, which you can't. But Stanley Jordan is using this, like 3,000 years later, 4,000 years later.
Right.
And I found it unbelievably profound. And I felt that Stanley Jordan was like Bach level in terms of his talent, because we were sat there going, oh my God, that's what certain musicians are trying to do. And at those musicians who are trying to do that, they're the ones who make music. That's what I mean by the quality. And the thing that was unbelievable, because Stanley Jordan is one of the greatest musicians of the last 50 years, right? We're in a Zoom meeting, so we've got the headphones on. It's all digital. But Stanley Jordan has got this guitar and he gets his sound, and then he goes, I'll do some improvising for you. So he's improvising, and it's just me and my mate in Zoom with Stanley, and we could interrupt at any point. And my hair was standing on end, because again, it was the recognizing that this was happening in real time. He was relating to us. I could stop it or start it, and I didn't want to speak. But he was trying to sell it to us. He was trying he was trying to be kind to us. That's what you don't get with the recording. He was trying to get us to be happy, and we wanted to be happy, and he wanted to, and it was full of love. You could see it. And when we said, God, that was incredible, he smiled like a child, even though he's a bloody genius. This is what we have forgotten about art and music. It's the idea of quality. It's the idea of depth and substance there. I think I've got to my point. That's what I wanted to say. That music has a function. It's so profound. CDs and records are like an echo of it, and it can come through there, but it is like literally like an echo.
You have to engage to get it out of there. It's like reading a book. When you're reading a book, you're not actually having a conversation, and no one's talking to you, but you enliven and chant the words of the book to hear them in your ears, so that you then are having a dialogue with this person who died 1,000 years ago or 100 years ago or last week, wrote it. An interesting thing that you reminded me of is in the first chapter of the Gospel of John, it says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And the interesting thing about that word is it's the word logos in Greek, which contains a lot more than just our simple prosaic use of the word word. It implies relationship. It implies all of this. If you go back to the first verse in Genesis, it says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and God said, so the word is there. And Leonard Bernstein once said, now, can you imagine God saying, like ordering lunch, let there be light? He said, I always had a fantasy of, let there be light being this explosive piece of music but somehow this relationship and music and sound and time, which goes into space, all relates to each other. And it's, I think one of the things that makes music so mysterious when you're really in the presence of music. I have a friend here who plays the piano, plays these classical pieces. She just gives me chills being in the room with her as she's doing it, because she's so good. But she's also, I became very good friends with her because I walked up to her afterwards. It was in a small room, in a little room in a museum. And I said, you, of course, know that piece of music really well, but you forget that when you play, and it looks like you're looking for each note like it's brand new. So you're not just reading the music, but you're going, each piece is just happening now. And she goes, you got it. That is what it is. And I think it's this relationship that's so important. And the problem is all the stuff, all the abstractions, all the layers of mediation we put between ourselves and the realities of things like music. So I start to wonder about, of course, there's the recording. And there's a bit of a prehistory of commercialism before that, which also relates to sheet music as a form of technology. But then I start to, and maybe you can address this, what is the relationship of amplification to music. That is to say, for instance, it's one thing to be in a room with a musician playing live, just playing an acoustic instrument. It's different when they're playing with amplification. And it's very different when, in my CBGB's example, they're playing amplification that's overwhelming for the size of the room. What do you think?
Well,
about that?
it's really interesting because I believe if once you understand how art works in the 20th century, that the money makers divide the audience from the creators. The creators are superstars. The audience are just the receivers of their superstar. It is literally like Mount Olympus. The gods come down. And amplification allows you to do that. So now, rather than just being in a bar and same people as you just have to play a bit of banjo in the corner entertaining you and you can sing along, now you go into a gig and the lights, just like Bernstein says, the lights come up and the smoke happens and out comes the gods, who now can play to 20,000 people. And anyone who's gone to a huge gig knows that there's no enjoyment in that. You are just rejoicing at being in the presence of the gods.
Yes.
And then the internet comes along. And now everyone's holding up their phones because they're not even caring about the moment they're in. They're thinking about the future. They just want to say, I went to see the Rolling Stones. They're 8 years old. They'll be dead soon.
I was there with Taylor Swift.
Yeah, but the funny thing is that whilst this is going on, the internet is allowing people to express themselves, and suddenly the music, there's no one buying hi-fis anymore. Music's not that, you were going, why did the music industry not put the money into hi-fis? Because that's why no one listens to music, which is true, because now you're listening to it on little headphones. And so amplification went big. Now amplification's gone back to being tiny. And it's all about your own personal space. Now, what's really interesting in this is if you go back to the beginning of it, and this is why I've got into so much trouble and why we became friends over the internet, is this whole idea of jazz and its history. I realized that the original Dixieland Jazz Band invented jazz. I'll say it now. I didn't want to say it before, because before the original Dixieland Jazz Band, we do not have a clue what anyone was playing. We don't know whether it sounded like jazz or not. It could well have, but we don't know. We don't know what Buddy Bolden was playing. We don't know what Papa Jack Lane was playing, or the Onward Jazz Band or whatever they were called. We don't know what they were playing.
And that recording of music from New Orleans in like 1910 or
we haven't got that.
1890.
And the thing is, I realised that the original Dixieland Jazz Band was not a bunch of posh white people who had decided to copy all these black musicians in New Orleans, that they were part of the history of New Orleans. That the people like Pete LaRocca and, had been in Papa Jack Lane's band. And I traced that back and couldn't find a point where you didn't have both white and black bands. Now, of course, the black musicians were bringing a whole host of stuff to it, and masses of stuff. But you have to be a racist to decide that stuff was somehow ethically better than the stuff that was coming in from somewhere else. The racism is horrible, but in art, let's just take that away. So you have a historic band, and because there are actually recordings before, and I drew attention to James Europe's recordings, but they're straight and they're not. Original Dixieland Jazz Band had a groove, it had sounds. They were like, it was chaos, it was fast, right? And what this was, and it was recorded with this intention, was that the original Dixieland Jazz Band was a novelty record. It was supposed to entertain people on a level, and it kicks off the recorded industry. The whole popular music begins with novelty. Now, you fast forward to the thing and you start looking at TikTok and memes, and you're looking at people photographing their dinners, and they do all this stuff. And then every now and then somebody will do something and it suddenly reaches into the community and goes viral, as they say, which I think is a terrible term because it relates it to some sort of disease. Nobody said that Picasso went viral. Nobody says that Stravinsky. And so I've become very aware that all art, when it's really art, is in the realm of novelty. That novelty becomes successful. People then start to copy it, and within copying it, they add in more sophistication. It goes to a high point where it's absolutely profound art. Original Dixieland Jazz Band is profound art, but the Hot Fives are. It's 10 years.
Right,
Hot Five is profound art. And that actually lasts quite a long time. And then when the elites notice it, they grab it and they say, this is ours now. And they pick it up and stick it in the museum. And that is what everyone calls art. Art has become all the stuff that's dead and stuck in the museum. And in 100 years' time, we are going to be celebrating those people that came up with the memes that have now evolved when they trace it back, because that's where the art is.
Mm-hmm.
You see? And so what is wonderful about records, because I have to say it, is they go back to that time. I know you love this, is that, you know, when you pick a record up, I mean, look, see this here, right? This is a repackage of a band that is called Max. And this album is called Beyond Rodin. It was made in the 70s. It wasn't a big success at all. But this album, you can't even find it on YouTube. You can't find it anywhere. Right. The guy that was in this band contacted me because they they found a decent mix of it, and they're putting it out. And I like having this, even though it's new. It's the artifact, and it's pointing to something rare.
Right.
It's pointing to the time. It's a relic.
I think musicians traveling and selling vinyl and CDs is great, because it's a way for them in our world to give people something that is a souvenir, a memento, but something that calls them back to that. And some people have said, you know, even when you listen to an album, the first time you hear a song and the first time it really clicks with you, every listening after that is you kind of remembering the first time you heard it.
Yeah. But some records aren't like that, you see, because yesterday, I do this about once a week. I put on Do I Do by Stevie Wonder, and every single time it hits me like the first time I've heard it. It's one of the few recordings. Yeah. I don't know why it is about it. And I actually filmed myself listening to it for my patrons, and I said, this is what I do once a week. I just put on Do I Do, and every time it hits me that hard. It never doesn't. And part of it is because it's 10 minutes long. The song's amazing, but once they get into it, Stevie Wonder does something on that record that they never do. Once they're in that groove and I'm enjoying it, it doesn't fade out. He keeps going until the band dies out. And it's just wonderful, because it doesn't sound like a record, because records have a beginning and an end. Stevie Wonder just lets it record, and it's suddenly you feel like you're in the room with Stevie, and he's chatting and he's going, now you do this and do that, and he tries to improvise the lyric, he gets it wrong, it's all on there. Suddenly I'm in the room with Stevie, and then suddenly, and you know, if you're in the room with Stevie and he's playing, because he's like bloody Stanley Jordan, he's like one of these greats, he's like Beethoven, he's like Louis Armstrong, he's one of those guys that you would hit you so hard. It would hit you so hard. Right. And that's what music is. That's what music is. And they're so powerful that it leaves an echo on the recording. But very few people do. Very few people.
I think the good recordings do that. They leave you with a trace of time. They leave you with a moment, which is sometimes just absolutely amazing. Other times you just say, oh, that's what that era was like, or that's what those people were like. And then I have a very short list of songs that every time I play them, it's like, and sometimes the song has been with me for a while, and then suddenly I'll hear it, and it really activates. And then I start, So
what the hell's going on? And what's interesting, it's different for everybody, but sort of the same. Because if you say a song, even if I don't like it, I will understand why it hits you so hard, whereas something else doesn't. Now, what's that interesting with capitalism is what the music industry was like. They were like, Ray Charles has just gone, he's gone and got some gospel song, but he's put like dirty lyrics to it, and he's invented this new thing, and everyone's buying it. You know, I got a woman, now everyone's buying it. And so they go, well, can you do that? And then some other guy then goes, yeah, I can try and do that. But he's still great, because he's still trying to do it. They want to be able to redo it, and they don't know how. And what's happened is, as soon as the machines came out, rather than the machines becoming more and more sophisticated at capturing a live moment, the industry didn't want that. People didn't want that. What they wanted to do was use the machines to do the impression of what Ray Charles was doing, and now all the music's like that, and that's what you hear pumping out with that bass drum, pumping out. You know,
they want milk.
That bass drum you hear,
dry.
yeah, that bass drum you hear is actually the dim echo of, as you know, of gay clubs in the late 70s that were a communal. What was going on in those clubs was far more important than that bass drum banging away. There was a meritocracy of people being able to make music for a gay club out of a machine and be able. And that's what it's all about.
If we go back to the origins of recording, for instance, one of the things I know is that classical music changed completely because of recording. Because in the past, you know, the musicians would gather, they would play a song, everyone would applaud, and then would go home. Now, did they play it perfectly? Probably not. Did they play it like a metronome? Probably not. And so there are some interesting recordings much later of people playing Baroque music, actually following the notation, which is much less even. For instance, if you listen to a Handel's Messiah, Mormon Tabernacle Choir, huge choir, and they're doing this romanticized version of it, you know, like 19th century version. But if you go back to the Baroque era, and there were some people who started to do this, suddenly, oh wow, this is really fascinating. This Vivaldi's Four Seasons doesn't sound like the thing I've heard over and over and over again. It sounds alive now. And I think that recording, though, had this effect upon music to make it more perfect.
No, without a doubt. And I know that directly because being a drummer. When I started drumming in 1980, the drum machines had just come out, and then eventually it got to a point where I could get a drum machine, which was quite late. Now suddenly I've got a drum machine, so now I can stick my headphones on because you can't play to a metronome, not an old one that goes click 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 when you play the drums. You can't hear it. So I would have a drum machine next to it, but also the band suddenly wanted you to replicate the drum machine. And so the drums have gone through they've gone through to a point now that people are tuning drums so they sound like samples of drums. You know, they're hitting a drum. It's like everyone has to be super consistent.
Right.
As well. It's not just about the time being exactly quantized. It's also about the spatial aspects have to be correct. It's like everything's got to be dynamically in a certain way. I hate it.
It's interesting that in the 21st century, it's gone from the musician to the producer, the emphasis. And so, you know, Max Martin or Dr. Luke or, you know, all these guys got big bucks for producing these hits. And when you listen, I've actually gone to different channels and watched guys talk who are younger guys about music from the past. And what's interesting to them is they don't hear in Bob Dylan his song as he's singing, you know, Masters of War or something like this. They hear the production and they go like, well, the production isn't really that good. They don't hear what I might hear being alive as that was composed and what that meant and such. They don't hear, you know, like for them, if the sound sounds somehow muddy, somehow not developed, not compressed enough, something like that, they start to get really uncomfortable with it. And this has led me to start to wonder, okay, is production music?
No, this is the point I've come to, and I think the general audience does not have a clue about this. And so musicians are moaning about AI. This is a whole thing that I really cannot get across in one video, and I'm trying to get my head around it. Right, this is the mainstream narrative that you will hear. Paul McCartney will come out and say AI is really bad because the way it works, it trains itself on other musicians. So it takes something that somebody has a copyright on, their song or their sound, that belongs to them, and then it replicates that, and so they should get the money. Now the thing that Paul McCartney doesn't say is the way copyright works and the way royalties work is if they start doing that, they won't know the specific song it will be based upon, in the same way as there's whole tons of tracks that are played on the radio where they don't know where the money go, who it should be paid for, it's unclaimed, and that's millions and millions of dollars which go into a big pot. and that is then shared out to the artists based upon their market share. So Paul McCartney, a lot of his royalties are for songs that aren't his. They're for other people's songs that are unclaimed, right? And so when this AI thing happens, the record companies are trying to angle it so that they will be able to say, right, you know, you pay into a copyright thing, and then we'll share that money out amongst us. And the big guys will be getting money for nothing. In the same way as artists who had sold millions of records in the 70s, then sold again when they went onto CD, then sold again when they went to download, and now getting paid money from Spotify. Even though it's a dribble, they are still getting money out of the mainstream big Mount Olympus people are getting the money. And that's what you will hear about AI. Now, what's going on in the background that nobody tells you is that when they remixed the Beatles albums, right, they used AI to separate the tracks. Now, what the general public thinks is that the AI comes along and it takes, here's Paul McCartney's bass line, and it pulls it out using AI. It's not what happens. It listens to it and then goes, I think Paul McCartney was playing something like this, and creates an AI bass line, which is not the bass line. Right. And so you could take that Bob Dylan album, you could go to a website which is free on the net, you could drop that track in, and it will now divide that up into all the separate parts, and then you
I've experimented with those.
Yeah, you could re-trigger the drums, you could put Bob Dylan's vocal in tune, you could put big like snare drums, 808s on everything, you could pump the bass line up, and you could put it out so those producers would be happy. And they would think that they've made it better and that what they are doing is music, but they're not. Now, part of the problem here is postmodernism. They all came out, so there's that you know, there was no true creativity. It was just dead white males that were trying to push their sort of meta narrative to maintain their white supremacy. We'd have all that crap for so many years, but the fact is they made the point that it's all just it's like just reconstructed, isn't it, out of everything else? There's no original ideas, right? And so that has set us up, and people don't understand how much that has affected our cultural gaze, because the intelligentsia have been pushing these ideas out for 50, 60 years. And so when AI does that, we assume, well, that is art. Nobody turns around like they would have 100 years ago. Well, that's just not art. Why? Human beings didn't make it. Well, what's the difference? The difference is I know that the human beings didn't make it, so I'm not accepting it. Right. Because does that make sense? You know, the cultural relationship, if you'd have had with a bunch of robots singing in it.
Have you played with things like Udio?
Yeah, I'm on it. I've played with Udio. I use AI on my channel all the time.
Right.
I've been into every. I mean, you see now when you make a track, you don't have to be able to mix it. The AI will mix it for you. You don't have to be able to. You don't have to EQ anything like the old days. Right. It will EQ it for you if you've got drums bleeding all over your vocal, which was what all those old records sound muffly because of that's going on. They're playing in the same room, and you just remove the drums from the vocal track. It's astonishing what this will do. Right. And there's things that so for example, all the bootlegs that were recorded of famous bands, no one's done this yet, but all the bootlegs you can feed into AI, and then 5 minutes later we can have pristine live albums coming out of the Rolling Stones or Led Zeppelin that sound better than the albums did, because AI will separate it or remix it, put everything correct, right? But the thing is that more than that, we are going to get, and it will be the Beatles, because it's always the Beatles that lead the way. We were going to get a Beatles album because that last track that they put out was so close to not being real. Right. It was AI that made that.
Yeah.
They found a cassette of John Lennon that he chucked away because it was a second-rate song, a dirty, horrible cassette. Fed that into AI, and then was able not only to put John Lennon on it, but also George Harrison on there. It's AI, right. And I know why the Beatles are doing it, because Paul McCartney and Ringo don't need the money, but there's a huge company behind the Beatles, and they all need to get paid, and they are thinking, what can we do next with this? There's the Beatles Incorporated. What can we we put a submarine out? Can you look at the new Led Zeppelin film? Right? I hate to say this because I know Robert, but it's my idea. They uncovered John Bonham's wedding photos and an interview with John Bonham that no one had heard before. So what can we do with this? How about, shall we put a mainstream film out that will make millions because we've got that? This reconstituting. It's nothing wrong with it because the audience want to see it. I want to see the Led Zeppelin movie. But what I find on my channel is every time I start to say this, I get such huge pushback because everyone has been indoctrinated. And this is so counterintuitive to them. You see, it's so counterintuitive for me to turn around and say, well, most dance music isn't actually music. It sounds terrible. Jazz is not black music, it's human music, and it was made by human beings, all sorts of different.
Well,
that's terrible.
It was during the disco era. It was during the disco era where the producer rose to the top of that heap in the disco world. It was, but a lot of it starts with Sgt. Pepper's and the Beach Boys and stuff. How the production became so much more important, and all the bands started to imitate these new styles of production. But of course, they were still working with the bands. But eventually, you have the tools so that you don't need the band anymore. And I did a thing where I have to.
We haven't said this for anybody watching. I have to say this and just jump in and say this. If you put the radio on and you listen to any music that's been made in the last 10, 50, maybe 20 years, there are no musicians on it. There's barely singers on it.
Right.
Anybody who's watching this, you could talk into a microphone and give it to a modern producer, and they will turn it into a vocal.
Right.
Right. My mate who won a Grammy. Right. I said, What did you get a Grammy for? And he said, put in famous singers in tune who can't sing.
Well, also, we can do that live in concerts as well. Yeah. And a lot of people don't realize how much auto-tuning and how much, stuff. Like, for instance, people have commented on Taylor Swift's tour. It's really hard to know where she starts and where the production starts because there are elements of it that are there, but they've done such a good job of integrating it that you would have to be a professional producer to pull it apart, and not just a producer, but someone who works behind the scenes at a live concert.
People haven't got a clue that modern bands are miming, basically, and what you are hearing very often, the bits in between the songs where the singer is talking, that's scripted because there's a backing track running. Now, players might be playing along over the top to it, but you see, if you've got a drummer and he's got a click in his ear, and that click is not just triggering all the music that you're playing and all the string sections of the backing vocals, but it's also triggering the video and the lights. You can't stop. Right, I know drummers have told me this is what, and it's a technical job. I couldn't do it.
Oh, yeah.
And then they're playing. When they hit their snare drum, you don't hear the snare drum. It triggers a fake snare drum, but it looks like a real snare drum, and they have to just hit it exactly in time. That minuscule bit is the bit that's live, but nobody can deviate from the scripts because the lights will be out of sync and the video will be out of sync. And that's what you go and see. And I have predicted that in 10, 20 years' time, those gigs will be gone.
Yeah.
Because Taylor Swift is the last gasp of it. And it's so huge because it's the last gasp of it. But her live show is not about them. You're no longer going to see someone perform live. You're going to be in the presence of Taylor Swift.
But it's a religious experience.
Yeah, and it's just the knowledge that she is in there somewhere.
Right. Well, she will do the thing where she does songs that aren't scripted, and she loves things like when it rains or when she has an acoustic aspect and stuff, so people can actually see her doing something. And if something goes wrong, she'll just kind of throw it away and just say like, it's live. But at the same time, if you look at the spectacle part of the show, you're going like, no, there's a lot going on here that. I have a friend named Laura who's a church musician in Wisconsin. She works for the Lutheran Church, but she knows a lot of tech stuff. She was telling me about glitch pop, and I'd never heard of that. And it was kind of a weird transy electronic scene. But I was talking with her, and she's very aware of this. And she was saying, and we both agreed that the future has to be live performances, the future of music, That is to say, and by live, not big, these huge concerts, but smaller personal venues we have to emphasize them again to get people out of their houses, put their phones down, and participate in music making. I mean, if I really had my way, I would. One of the reasons I'm in Georgia is because they are less disconnected than we are. They still have the smartphone. There are issues. It's not like they live in a perfect society. But when it comes to music, for instance, you ask the kids here, do you know any folk songs? They all know tons, because that's just part of their culture to know songs. And their songs are so complex. I mean, they have a kind of a yodeling style in an area called Guria, which is just so complex, and you can get so many layers of harmonies, and they're doing these things in the middle of it. And I'm sitting there saying, and everybody knows what that is. I'm sitting there, so your folk music starts on this complex level. It means you can understand a lot about music. And in fact, Stravinsky, before he died, he was asked, so what kind of music have you been listening to lately? And he said, he mentioned a few composers he liked, and he says, but mostly Georgian music. And when I discovered Georgian music, I said, I've got to get myself there. So I'm learning from being here. Like I say, it's not perfect. The modern world has come. The smartphone has made its indentation into the culture, but I am seeing I think what we need as we go into the future is, I don't want to say a movement, but we need more reality. We need people who will just say, I want the real thing. Because for me, real music is like nutrition, just like real texture, and not these just barren buildings we're given, real ornamentation on buildings. All of this has something to do with what it means to be human, our relationships to the world around us through the aesthetic. And I think that most people having their primary music-related experience being little recordings that they use to change their mood as they walk throughout the day or something, it's kind of like you're just being given Tang, and you've never had fresh squeezed orange juice. This drink they made to. It's kind of like a more nutritious Kool-Aid with vitamin C and stuff. They made this for the astronauts, but it's the same. There's the reduction and the reduction, the mediation and the mediation. But just squeeze an orange, and get the real thing. And if you do it right, you'll realize, oh my goodness, this is something that really. This is what I wanted. And I think our musical nutrition, we're getting anemic. We're getting a musical scurvy. We're not getting, and I think that's part of what we need. It's interesting. There's no movement right now, the way there was throughout so much of the second half of the 20th century, that people, it's not about a societal thing anymore. It's all become
because you haven't got the grand narrative of the Mount Olympus and the audience, you see. And so the record industry became, when it first happened, what happened, I think, was that all these young people loved it. It wasn't old people listening to jazz in the 1920s that created the jazz age. It was all the youngsters going out, all the ladies with the short skirts dancing on top of aeroplanes,
right.
And all this sort of stuff. That it was young people that created the music industry, and then they started to grow up, and that is the music industry. I mean, if I was going to sign someone, I would sign someone who's already been around for 20 years, has already got an audience, and all we got to do is pay for a new album that they can bang out, and it will sell because their audience will. And that's still going on to some extent now, even though there's no profit in it. Those bands, those legacy bands, are still able to, get some money out of them using other methods. The industry was very aware it needed to find the new things for the new generation to like, so they could feed them into the sausage machine, and that's what happened all along. So that the industry had people in there looking for these new things, and these new things were real, and they did have a thing, and they were new. But the thing is that new things now are like so tiny that only a few people know about them, and then you get told about some glitch thing, like this is like a tiny little community of people that have got into this one thing. And I miss the great gestures, the grand gestures. I appreciate, like I had the Beatles on again this morning in the car, because when I hear it, I go, wow, this is like this. Whatever they did, just spoke to everybody. And that was the best thing about this sort of capitalist music industry thing. I'm preparing a video where I'm going to say the Beatles are better than Beethoven, and the reason I'm going to say that is because they do more. That Beethoven was actually limited. He was a genius and he was brilliant, but he was limited by the technology of the time. The Beatles come to fruition where there's this mass media thing, and then you can add everything in, their personalities. You can have found sounds. You can have vocals. My basic argument will be that Beethoven never was able to say, you know, money can't buy you love. He was never able to say that in a cheeky way, and that's something the Beatles can do. But the Beatles could do sort of what Beethoven did because they had the recording studio to replicate the orchestra, and they had people like George Martin to be able to help.
I see Beethoven as the first classical musician who became conscious of being a big A artist and a prophet, and understand what he was doing from this romantic perspective.
Totally right.
But you know, I've said to people, you can do a whole history of the 19th century, and you can leave Beethoven out of it, and you're not missing anything. But if you do a whole history of the 20th century, you can't get around. Say Charlie Parker starts insinuates himself, but then once you get to Bob Dylan, the Beatles, and Hendrix, that 1, 2, 3 combo, you can't get around from that. After that, you know, you can talk about Elvis as a star, but what happened in the 60s changed basically the way the world works, and you can't get around that because music suddenly now is part of history. And that's what the Beatles, I look at it as the combo of Dylan influences the Beatles, they influence him, and both of them influence Jimi Hendrix. And
let's take Bob Dylan, I think Dylan, he invents rock music. It's rock and roll before then. It's a novelty. It's rock and roll. It's doo-wop. It's the Trashmen. It's Birdies of Word.
Good. Okay, I'm good.
Okay, so... then Dylan comes along. Now, I know a whole bunch of people, like Robert Plant's generation, the Led Zeppelin, the Black Sabbath, the ELOs, all those guys that I know, Dylan was the man. And I hate Bob Dylan, and I've never got it. And I've listened to the albums over and over, and I don't understand it, right? And I've studied him. I've always been aware.
I get it.
He's a genius, and I understand what he did, and he's the most important musician in the music that we play. I understand there'd be no Hendrix, there'd be no Frank Zappa, there'd be no Beatles without Dylan. Right. And so I'm listening to all this stuff. I'm studying it, and the other day I go, right, let's imagine what it's like. It's 1962. Let's listen to the first album of Dylan. Just let's listen to him in order. So I put the first album on, and I was like, oh wow, this is like a middle-class white guy pointing out all this incredible black music. This is amazing. I didn't realize he did this. He's you know, all these old blues songs and folk songs. He's bringing to, you know, us. This is amazing. And I remember thinking, and he's actually quite good. He's quite a good folk singer here. It's not like later on. He actually sings quite well, and it's quite nice. He's a great guitar player. It's nicely recorded. I thought this is brilliant. I wonder what he does on the next album. Then you put the next album on, and it opens up with "Blown in the Wind," and I was like, he just nailed it here, didn't he? The answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind. It was like, it's almost telling me now. It's like, so he took all that, and then he was able to then, what was going on, it's not that he created it. He was a reflection of a feeling that was going on in the 1960s. And because he was a great artist, he was able to embody it and every single song is infused with something that the first album doesn't have, but it comes from the first album. And then I went on to the next album, Bring It On Home, and that's the band arrives, and he opens up with Subterranean Homesick Blues. And you go, oh my God, he's invented rock music, he's invented rap, he's invented, and then suddenly I'm like, get it now. So hearing it in order, so that generation, they got those.
That's the back end, and go back into history. I thought that the recent movie they did, A Complete Unknown, was pretty good, although I made a video talking about all the stuff that they missed. But still, I thought for a generation that really doesn't understand Dylan at all, they did a good job of introducing him to them, because they've got this, the hot guy, Timothy Chalamet, who's, pretty well liked by the Gen Z types.
So
what's really bizarre, I put up some photographs of me when I was young, and people resoundingly went, "You look like Timothy Chalamet," and I went, "Who's the
you kind of
bloke?" You know, and I was like, "Who's this bloke?" I can't. And so I looked into it, and then I found out who's played Dylan, and then I found out that he actually, even though he's a young guy, some of his political statements are not. They're not the Gen Z statements, which I thought, I like this bloke, you know. So he was questioning it all, you know. And the Dylan film, I think what it is that you end up with, if you look at this sort of postmodern era that starts in 1962 with that first Dylan album, I believe, and then you track it through. It's interesting. This guy they've done the film of it, and it's all packaged up into a sort of, let's now make this. You know, the fact that Pete Seeger was running around with an axe trying to chop through some cable, which he wasn't doing. I mean, it never happened. But even if it did happen, it's not that.
I think he said, "If I had an axe,
I would
never went and tried to do it." So,
you know, I mean, it's nothing really. What they're doing, they're fetishizing what happened because the elites really want to believe in that 60s idea. They don't want to admit it's atrophied. They're holding on to it because it's what they believe in, and they can't let it go. And we have to let it go.
Yeah, and it's like the '60s and the whole era. They don't realize we've slipped out of that a while ago, and you know that was. I mean, they didn't understand when Nirvana came along. I remember when Nirvana, Kurt Cobain shot himself. I remember the kids were really depressed, but the adults were like, "Oh, he's just another singer." They didn't get it, and nor did they get that the things have changed. Although I am reminded, you know, the Rolling Stones are still out there like some sort of weird dinosaur in a wheelchair. And I am reminded of Mick Jagger once saying in the 1970s, early 70s, he said, "I'd rather be dead than sing Satisfaction at the age of 50.
And now he's 104. Or somewhere around about there.
Yeah.
And I think it's wonderful. Very touching and wonderful for me at my age that Black Sabbath are getting back together in not my hometown, but pretty close. They're coming back together in the Midlands. Now, Ozzy, they're not going to play anything. Right. They will just be back together. This is far more a symbol of because Black Sabbath, I have come to think that the greatest band is Black Sabbath in terms of me. The most important
friend James has a channel, and he's totally on your page with that.
Yeah, because Black Sabbath invented heavy metal, and heavy metal is the most important music form of the second half of the 20th century. That's the bottom line. We all start off in heavy metal. I started off. All my friends did everything. It's like the grain. It's William Blake's grain of sand that contains everything. The new wave of British heavy metal that I was a part of in the early 80s contains everything, absolutely everything. Heavy metal is the secret to everything, and Black Sabbath invented it. And the reason is because this comes from Birmingham, it comes from where I am, and so I have a real close association with it. I've met all those guys, you know. Tony Iommi's come to see me play live. He's
Rummy,
but the thing is, and I said, and I was interviewed by the local radio about it, and I said, I don't care if Black Sabbath just stands on the stage together, because if everyone who's going, I can't afford a ticket, but everyone who's going is they are not actually going to hear Black Sabbath. They're going to pay homage. They are. It's the reversal of the Mount Olympus. They're going to stand there, and we're going to perform to them. They're going to take it, and we're going to go, "Thank you so much. It's over." And then Ozzy goes away and can't do. And
is it a tribute concert?
Pardon?
Is it a tribute concert?
No, Black Sabbath had said they're going to do a gig in Birmingham, and so the original lineup's coming back together now. Behind the scenes, Ozzy's too ill to do it, and so there's been a few statements by Sharon Osbourne, who's managing the whole thing, that where they've said like they will do something on stage. We don't know what, so they don't even have to play a tune. But once it was announced, every single legendary rock band or metal band are also playing it. So you've got Anthrax, you've got Metallica, you've got Guns N' Roses, you've got it's absolutely and then all the bands that aren't formed, they're still coming. So Billy Corgan's coming from Smashing Pumpkins, some of the guys from Audioslave, Tom Morello's. It's like this alternative real world of music that I grew up with, not all the superficial stuff, all the people that meant something to me, they're all coming to pay homage. And for me, this is the grand end of this. And then we have to let go of it because it's passing into myth. It really is.
Within about 10 years, almost every legend from the 60s and 70s will be gone. There'll be a few who live to be 100, but...
I'll tell you something that's always struck me. When I was quite young in Birmingham, they had a magazine called Brumbeat, and it covered the local music scene. They had nobody to cover the jazz. I was really young at the time. And they said to me, do you want to do a jazz review? And I went, yeah. And I said, who is it? And they said, Red Rodney's playing. So I go down to this little venue in Birmingham, and I watched Red Rodney play, had a chat to him, said I was reviewing it. It didn't mean anything. Now, Red Rodney was the trumpet player. He was the white trumpet player with Charlie Parker. When you watch the film Byrne, he's the one who's ginger and they have to say it's albino red and all that bit. That was Red Rodney. Now, if you met him, it would be like meeting one of Jesus's disciples. But back then, none of that existed. It just did not exist. And I when I was on tour, I met people like B.B. King and stuff, and it was incredibly powerful. But it wasn't like it is now because our attitude to that period has changed. We are packaging it all up, putting it ready to go on the music. They are going to become the Billie Holidays and the Elvis Presleys.
Yeah, well, I am very grateful for all the musicians I met in my time in New York and beyond. But New York in particular, I'd meet Bob Quine, and it's just like talk about the guitar stuff, and him talking about going to play with Lou Reed in Italy and all this stuff. I knew Tom Verlaine, who I sold his record collection, so I got to know him pretty well, and I would, ask him. And I realized something. Every now and then I'd bump into Thurston Moore from Sonic Youth. And I realized if you went up to these guys and just said, "Oh, I really like your music. You're so good," they didn't want to hear you. But if you went up to them and said, for instance, with Thurston Moore, "Hey, I've got a new collection of avant-garde stuff from a collection," he'd be like, "Oh, I'll be right down," because that's what he was interested in. He was interested in music and such, and
music. Because the reason for this is to get back onto what we're talking about. Is music's made out of love. It's not about zeros and ones. It's not about the love that happens for the records is the actual records themselves. And no one's going to chuck their records in the bin. However much we put them down so they're not real music or they're a shallow echo of real.
Well, any more than I would get rid of my books. I'm not going to get rid of my books.
And the thing is that this struck me the other day because I was watching an interview with Henry Rollins, and obviously Henry Rollins has a certain political outlook on life, and the polar opposite of Henry Rollins would be Ted Nugent.
Right. And
Ted Nugent, so someone came along to say, they said it would be a great show if we got you and Ted Nugent and put them together because you wouldn't get on because you're so politically different. And they put it to Ted Nugent. So Ted Nugent rings up Henry Rollins. So they gets on the phone and he says, I've heard about this. And Henry goes, yes, Ted. And then Henry Rollins goes, I've got to say, I saw you on the Cat Scratch Fever tour where he was a wanger. He said, it was incredible. And Ted and Nugent's like, oh, thank you so much. He said, we got it all. He said, from New York Dolls. And he starts telling his story to Henry Rollins. And they warm to each other. And he's saying, oh, I used to hang out with MC5. And Henry Rollins going, I can't believe it. No, and the thing is that those political beliefs, we think they're so important, but they're actually shallow because there's something deeper. Henry Rollins and Ted Nugent can disagree, but they shouldn't hate each other because there is a sense within the music. I don't say they love each other like brothers or parents, but there's a sense within music when you meet somebody and you have that connection with them. And I've had it all my life with musicians. If you go to a musician, like you say, go up to Thurston Moore and start saying, oh, you know this, you know that. And also what I've found is that musicians are interested in everything they don't like so much. So great musicians, when they meet you, they want to explore what you're into. I'm the same, and so all the discussions I have with a lot of my friends are about Bob Dylan and things like this. And now I'm getting older, I'm suddenly listening to country music, which I absolutely hated when I was younger. And now I'm suddenly getting country music, and I'm talking like Kenny Rogers. I'm listening to those records and goes, oh yeah, he's telling a story. You have to listen to the story. It's brilliant. It's
you
quite
funny.
It's just brilliant. And then you listen to the music, and all the musicians are virtuosos. But the thing is, it's in service of something else. It's not like Black Sabbath, but there's something else. And this sense of love and community of bringing people together, that goes back to the communal, what you were talking about at the top of this video. That's what music is in every single one, whether it's a football chants or it's the people in the little caves with their drums and their flutes, 100,000 years ago. At the end of the day, whatever it is about the relationship between people. That's what it is, and it's not about zeros or ones or some mad philosophical idea of computers replicating our consciousness. We can just forget all that. It's not worth thinking about.
One of my thoughts is that one of the big mistakes that was made, and this was easily exploited by the commercial folks, was we thought music was the reason for life. But what I've come to understand is music is not the center of life. It is the thing that describes life to us to help us find the center. It is Tarkovsky, the great Russian film director, once said, the artist is a servant, and that we are constantly trying to pay for the gifts we have been given. We are trying to do something for others. So, what musician matters alone? You need others. You need people to listen, but you also need people to play with. And, an artist may be alone, a writer may be alone, but eventually you want to put something out there. You want it to matter to someone outside of your head. And
I've said this over and over again, that when you make music, you want it for somebody else, which means that you believe that what you are doing will have some sort of predictable outcome in somebody else based upon the fact that they're a human being like you. And there is the complete reduction and destruction of postmodernism, because in postmodernism there's no such thing as that type of meaning. Beauty's in the eye of the beholder. If you think it's good, it's good. No, there is an absolute truth that you believe. You have. It's not about whether it exists or not. It's the fact that you have that belief, because art is really about you looking upwards. Remember what I said? Right. You've got nothing and you've got anything. You've got the idea of the void, of black, of nothingness. That's death. That's all the things that we fear. And that's powerful. We can go into the black space. That's what metal does. It goes into that black space and nothing. Mm-hmm. Terrifying. Mm-hmm. And then you've got anything. All the things that are out there, all the confusing things. You get nothing and anything. And if you can balance those two things, you have something. And that's it. That's absolutely every human endeavor. And music has a certain place within that, which I think
you can look at it also as chaos and order.
Chaos and order is one of the. Well, think what you said earlier on. You said something, and I'm not that religious, but what's the first line of Genesis again?
In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and God said, "Let there be light."
Right. So if you examine that, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. So God created light and the dark, chaos and order. That is what that is. It's that dialectic. Yeah. It's the parent and the child. It's Apollo and Dionysus. So that's the first thing God creates. He creates this dialectic, and then he says, "Let there be light." He says it. It's sound and light. It's filled with the vibration of the material which we are that art resides in. So the art, so art can be seen as a reflection of those two lines of Genesis. It basically is the embodiment of that as us human beings. It's us like going, yeah, that's true. Look, because I really believe that if this has come not from an intellectual thing. It's like. Every time you try and create a piece of art, like, so for example, I've started to think that talking on YouTube, this isn't science. We do an academic paper and we go, how do we back this up? We're not doing that here. We're having a conversation. But the conversation has got two elements to it. It's got a chaos and an order. And when you do these, you're aware that we don't want to go off on tangents. I don't want to have because anyone who's watched this, I'm going to say you had to stop the camera because I had an upset stomach. And then I came back and say, well, maybe this should be kept in because there's these two things going on. I'm trying to finish up here. I got a meeting at 12:30, and that's what's causing my stomach. I'm going to say it. There's that part of life, the real life, and I'm a bit stressed about this meeting I've got to go to, and I'm enjoying very much talking to you. Yeah. And so there's the visceral part of this, and then there's the fact that we're trying to keep it on track, but we haven't turned up when we're just reading a piece of paper, so we get to say there's a balance, isn't there, here, of trying to get somewhere between so the audience goes, they've said some really interesting things, but I've enjoyed the journey to it. I mean, that's what the people should be enjoying, the journey of this conversation as much as getting something from it. And that's what we're trying to do.
For me, everything is a relationship in time. And what I like to do whenever I meet anyone is say to myself, by the time, for instance, we're done here, we know each other a little bit more. Whereas I look at evil as being things that destroy relationships.
It's the light and the dark, and I'm going to have to finish up here now, Byrne. But I actually think that what's very interesting is what we've arrived at the end of this is very interesting. I don't really know you very well, okay? We've never met. I don't even think we've been in the same country at the same time, let alone met face to face.
We have actually been in the same country at the same time. I was in London the beginning of last year.
Oh, you were? Oh, so that's it. Yeah. See, I don't even know these facts, you see. But the point is...
Next time I go to... I have to pass through London, which be in a couple of years, I plan on making a visit to you. And
that would be lovely. But what's interesting here is you watch my channel, I watch your channel. So I feel like I know you a lot better because I see you quite a lot because I've got a new video out and I always check them out. They're always very long. Right. I don't always get to the end, but I'm sure you don't get to the end of mine. But because that's part of what this is.
I don't want, there's certain...
Nobody watches even everything.
Like, well, it's just like, okay, Prague isn't my wheelhouse, whatever that means. But if you just kind of are on a general subject, I'm going to get to the end. So, although I like some of your...
I do go on. What I'm trying to get across is that at the end of this, we've actually arrived at something. Rather than talking about these big things, we're talking about the relationship between you and me, which has developed, like you said, and this conversation is probably a lot more full of a sort of more closeness than the very first conversation we had when we first met. I feel it's a better conversation because we're a little bit braver to let it go further out, and we've known
each other a little longer.
Exactly that, and I agree entirely that art and music is about relationships. And so the thing that if you want a conclusion that I've come to at the end of this video chat to Byrne, which is a wonderful thing to do, and I suggest anybody who's out there, if you've got a friend, do this. Get on Zoom and hit record and put it up on YouTube. Doesn't matter whether anyone watches it or not, because this process is so interesting. I wouldn't have done this today. And the conclusion I've come to is that AI will not be able to replicate it because art is about the relationships between human beings, and the human beings bit of it is important. And the relationship with the recording or the relationship with the AI or the relationship with that is like an emulation of that. And sometimes the human being that behind it comes through, but AI is promising to remove that so it's even more distant than it was before. It's a computer. It's a computer going, I think humans would be a bit like this.
There are fake YouTube channels now, and I've found them, and you can tell someone's just talking in a kind of a level tone of voice. There's no breath that you hear. There's, everything is just put together. Someone just typed in a bunch of stuff and it came together. And someone said to me the other day, the reason I like your channels is because it's not AI.
Of course, that's what everyone's starting to say this now. I mean, this is what's going to happen in the whole of art. I did create a video using AI entirely. I wrote it. I went to ChatGPT and said, "Can you do a video like Andy Edwards on this subject about AI, and they came up with a script. I took this script and I took it to an avatar, and I got an avatar to say the script, and then I created a fake studio and I photographed my background, and then I got AI to drop it. So the whole thing was great. What was being said, but the thing was, when I introduced it, I said, "Can you? I want you to come on and insult Andy Edwards in this way." And I wrote what it wanted to do, and it kept saying, "Can't do this." And I was going, no, I want you to say they can't do this. We won't say that. It was looking at the sentences that I'd written, and it's going, I won't do this because it was insulting myself. And this is when I realized how the problem with AI is that they can't make AI without boiling in morality into it. It's not neutral. And so if you're creative, you're up against a pre-existing moral order, and artists don't do that. Artists break the moral order. So what I had to do was subvert it. And what I did was I said lots of really great things about me, knowing that the audience would know that I've created this, and actually take the piss out of myself. Yeah,
I remember that.
Yeah, and so, and that was, I was quite shocked. And then the rest of the video was me explaining this point that they are going to bake in this atrophied morality that we have to move away from. In the same way as we had to. I mean, if they'd have made AI in the 50s, it would have been racist. You see what I'm saying? It would have been racist.
Yeah. Well, what I'm saying is, I think there is genuine morality, but morality is found in the relationship. So AI can't have a relationship with you. So what it does is it takes the commercial morality of the time and puts it in. So, but it has to be commercial because they don't want to lose money on this when they make these. So they put in the limitations on what you can say.
So I mean, the amount of times that I have been using the AI to create thumbnails, and of course you have to keep spitting it out because it has to have all sorts of different ethnic minorities. And so if you've got a jazz group and you want them all to be black, because I do know the importance of black musicians in terms of creating jazz, and I'm thinking I don't want to mix. I want a 1920s jazz group, and they're not. They're either black or white, and then the AIs go, no, we've got to have it all. I'm trying to make a point here, and that's the problem. Is you go up against that sort of morality, right? And because this is another video I think when we get beyond this. And I'm really going to have to jump because I've got about 15 minutes to get to this meeting. It's up the road. I really think that sort of morality, which comes from a place to try and stop prejudice, stop racism, stop this and this. For me, this seems extremely racist. The fact that I cannot use AI to create an all-black jazz group from 1920. Or an all-white jazz group, or Roman soldiers that are all this is all nonsense, and you're coming up against it all the time, and it's not that the AI doesn't know. The AI knows, but it's pushing a certain view of the world.
Well, it's been instructed to give certain images for certain things. Yeah.
Well, did you enjoy my Al Jolson video?
What?
Did you enjoy my the greatest piece of the 20th century?
Yes, I thought I did. I really liked that one. Yeah.
I thought I got Byrne involved in it.
I'm here somewhere in this. So our friendship. So Andy, thank you for joining me, and thanks for spending time. And we will do this again.
Yeah, anytime. Just give us a shout, and I'm here, and I'm going to get you
to. We have if you need me, just.
I will
send a, wave a flag. I'll be there.
Brilliant. Okay then.
Have a good day. Keep the bowels in order.
Once I got this meeting out of the way, we're done, aren't we?
Yeah.
Okay, so there we are. Andy Edwards, drummer extraordinaire. Lots of interesting thoughts there, and here we are discussing music again, and I am sure we will do it in the future. So stick around. Also, you can follow me on my channel, The Anadromist, which is where I get into more ideas, and this video showed up there a couple months ago. And there are other channels. The Georgian Crossroads. That's a good one for following my life here in Georgia. I've got another one just on puppetry, dance, things like that, called Gravity from Above. And so thanks for being with us today. And as we say here in Georgia, droibit, which means temporarily. We will meet each other again.
When I go, I want you to give me 5 minutes. I told you, boys, I'm no escape artist. For the first time, I like the odds.
At the round earth's imagined corners, blow your trumpets, angels, and arise, arise from death, you numberless infinities of souls.